So I'm going to talk about how to solve quadratic equations by the completing the square technique. And let's just jump right into it. So the first thing that I want to make sure that you're good on is how to use the square root property, because you actually use the square root property as part of completing the square. So just a quick review on this. So the square root property assumes that you have something that looks like this. So something squared equals a number, okay? So to solve, I would take the square root of both sides. So when I do that, the side with the number is going to have this plus or minus in front of it. So I have now 2x plus 1 equals plus or minus 7, and then I break this into two separate cases. So this becomes 2x plus 1 equals 7, and 2x plus 1 equals negative 7. Okay. And I'm running out of space here, so I'll just kind of cut to the chase with this. So if I were to solve each of these for x, just subtract 1 and then divide by 2. So this will turn into 6 over 2, so this is going to equal 3, and then this is going to equal, this will turn into negative 8 over 2, so this will ultimately be x equals negative 4. Okay, so this is something that you've definitely got to understand before we talk about completing the square. So if you don't feel comfortable with this, I would strongly encourage you just to go back and make sure that you're solid on this. So I'm assuming you're solid on that. Let's talk about how to complete the square. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to complete the square on this little part of an equation right now. And I really just want to focus on the steps of completing the square. I kind of want to turn you into a robot on this process. A robot on this process. So what I want to say is that this first part is not going to make total sense just for a minute because I'm missing the context of having an equation. So just follow me on these steps that I need you to understand, and then we're going to put it all together later in the video, okay? So, all right, let's just talk about how do I complete the square. So what you're going to have when we talk about completing the square, we're talking about a little part of an equation that looks like this. Okay, so let's outline the steps for completing the square. The first thing that you want to do is you need to have an equation in this form, x squared plus bx. So whatever's attached to the x, that's going to be your b. So in this context, my b will equal 6. So once you identify what your b is, you always do these next two things. You take half of b, so let's calculate that. So half of b is just going to be, what is half of 6? Half of 6 is 3. And after you do that, so notice now I also need to calculate half of b squared. Okay, so I want to be really clear about this. You need all three separate labeled pieces, okay? I want you to write out b, half b, and half b squared. These are three pieces that you are going to want to consistently have, and you are going to see why later on. But let's just go ahead and establish good habits right away and understand we need all three of these pieces, okay? So this is the idea of completing the square. And this is the process that we're really referring to. Now, there is a much bigger context that we're going to put this into in a few minutes. But the thing I want to get in your system is when we talk about completing the square, it's b, half b squared. This is all I want to do for a moment, plus one extra step. So let me add on one more thing. So I'll make some space for this. So the last thing that we want to get in our system is that we're going to take whatever our half b squared is, and we're going to add it to the original expression and factor it. So here's what I mean. I have x squared plus 6x. So my half b squared in this case was 9. And here's the thing I want to get used to doing. I want to rewrite this now in its factored form as x plus 3 squared. Okay, so a huge hint for this. One of the reasons why I want you to label those three separate pieces is when you go to factor this, this number here will always be whatever your half b is. So this little map of your three labeled pieces are actually very important because this last piece you always add on, and then when you go to factor, you're always using the half b. So you need this as a roadmap. So this is kind of the steps that I want to get in your system, because once you kind of understand this, then when I put it in the context of how to actually solve, it will come together nicely. So let's do this one together, okay? So I'm actually going to encourage you to pause and think. So the first thing that I want you to do is I want you to identify what is the b, half b, and half b squared. So just pause for a second and write that down on your own and hit play when you're ready. Okay, so my b is 8. My half b, so half of 8 is 4. And then 4 squared is 16. Okay, so that's step 1. Or really step 1 and step 2, I guess. So now we want to do the last part of this, which is now I want to take this and I want to add it to the expression and factor this. So I would love if you would pause the video and do that on your own and hit play when you're ready. All right, so I'm going to have x squared plus 8x, and then I'm going to add the 16. Okay, and then to factor this, this will be x plus 4 squared, with the understanding that this plus 4, if I ever get lost, is always whatever my half b is. Okay, so let's keep going with this. I have another example here. So now what I would love for you to do is I would love for you to just do this one all the way through to make sure that you've got the idea. Hit play when you're ready. Okay, so my b in this case is actually a negative 10. So this whole thing is negative, so hopefully you included the negative. Then my half b is negative 5, and my half b squared. So when I square negative 5, that will become positive. So this is going to be positive 25. Okay, and then I asked you to go all the way through with this. So now I'm going to add the 25, and then I can factor this as x minus 5 squared. Again, notice this x minus 5 is literally what this is. And this is also literally how this factors. So this just becomes a cheat sheet for how to factor this thing. And it just always works out that this is always the half b. Okay, so the reason I keep bringing up the half b will be illustrated now in our next example, because, I wouldn't want you to get bored, of course. So now I've got x squared plus 3x. So let's go through this one together. Okay, so my b in this case is going to be 3. And so now we have this like cringe moment because I can't take half of 3. So what do we do? So the best practice for this, the way to make this actually as easy as possible on yourself, is to just leave the fractions. So I know, half of 3 is 1.5, but let's not bring decimals into this. Our life will be much easier if we just leave it as fractions. So I'm just going to call this 3 over 2, and that's good enough. And the reason why I do that is so that when I square this, so then I just have to square the top and the bottom of this fraction. So 3 squared is 9, 2 squared is 4. Okay, so here is my half b squared. So it's much easier if you just leave it as a fraction. And then I have x squared plus 3x plus 9 over 4. So I do have to factor this. And now if you're having that cringe moment of like, ugh, how do I factor this with this fraction? That's why I keep repeating that it's the half b, okay? So when you get stuck and you're like, I have no idea how I would factor this, it doesn't matter. It's always whatever your half b is. So it's going to be x plus 3 over 2 squared. Bada bing, bada boom, you're good to go. Cool. So I want to keep going with this idea now. And let's try this with now x squared minus 1/2 x. Okay, so I kind of want to continue the spirit of this. So my b in this case is negative 1/2. And I'm just going to like push forward with this having fractions. I'm not going to convert to decimals because it's actually going to be a lot easier. Okay, so the thing about taking 1/2 times b is now I'm effectively really multiplying negative 1/2 by 1/2. And, don't be afraid to write that out if you need to write that out so that this becomes negative 1 over 4. You can 100% write that out if your brain is like, it's fractions, but we've talked about this so many times, right? For multiplying fractions, you just multiply straight across. So no problem. Okay, so anyways, and then what about my half b squared? Well, then I just square the top and the bottom of this. So this will become positive 1 over 16. Cool. All right, so I want to encourage you to pause here and finish the factoring. Let's see how you're doing. Hit play when you're ready. Okay, so I'm going to have x squared minus 1/2 x plus 1 over 16. So I'm not going to panic about how this factors because it's just always whatever my 1/2 b is, right? So cool. that's how that factors. All right, so I have just one more of these, and I know I'm like doing this like a million times, but once I get you comfortable with this, then I think it makes the next part a lot easier. So that's why we're kind of drilling this. Okay, so I want you to do this one start to finish, all on your own. Hit play when you think you've got it. Okay, so my b in this case is 2/3, my half b. Okay, so if I take 1/2 times 2/3, the thing about that is that the 2's actually drop out in that case, so this becomes just 1/3. Okay. And then finally, I have half b squared, and so this is going to become 1/9. Okay, so now I'm going to have x squared plus 2/3 x plus 1/9, and that's going to factor as x plus 1/3 squared. Okay, so hopefully now you kind of trust the process on this, and now I can put this in the context of something that makes sense, because this is kind of weird, right? Like, why are we even doing any of this? And if you've had that question, totally fair. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to put this in the context of a full-blown equation. So I've got 2x squared plus 12x minus 16 equals 0. Okay, so let's include some steps for this. So step 1. So the leading coefficient must be 1, and if it's not, then you should divide to make it 1. And just as a reminder, remember, you are expected to pause the videos if you're taking notes on this. So, feel free to pause as needed. Okay, so I've got 2x squared plus 12x minus 16. So the leading coefficient means that this just needs to be x squared, not 2x squared. So I need to divide everything by 2. So I'm going to take my whole equation, and we're going to write this out in just excruciating detail so that we can really follow what it is that we're doing. So I divide everything by 2, and I'm left with x squared plus 12x minus 8 equals, plus 6x, sorry. X squared plus 6x minus 8 equals 0. Okay, cool. So that's step 1. Step 2 is to isolate the variables to one side. So what I'm talking about are these things with x's. I want those on one side. So this -8 needs to go over to the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add it over to the other side. I'm running out of space here, so I'm just going to jump to that step, but you could just add 8. So you can write that out for yourself should you desire. Okay, so I've got x squared plus 6x equals 8. So now I'll make a little space. Okay, so moving on. So if I'm here, now what I want to do is I want to complete the square, and I want to take whatever my 1/2 b squared is, and I want to add it to both sides. So this is why we did this over and over. So I've got this x squared plus 6x. This is where I'm going to complete the square, and we should feel comfortable with that now. So I have my b is equal to 6, my half b is equal to 3, and then my half b squared is equal to 9. And now what I need to do is I need to add this 9 to both sides. So I'm going to have x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 8 plus 9, right? So this 9 is added to both sides. Okay, now as part of completing the square, I know that I need to factor this side, right? So how does this side factor? That side will factor x plus 3 squared, and then what is 8 plus 9? It's 17. Okay, cool. So believe it or not, we're almost done. I actually want you just to look at where we're at right now, and can you see what has to happen next? Okay, so making some space. Now that I'm at this step, I'm going to use the square root property to solve. So that's why we opened up with a problem on the square root property. So this is going to be plus or minus the square root of 17. And then I can finish solving for x, so this becomes -3 plus or minus the square root of 17. Okay, cool. So that's the whole shebang of completing the square. So what we're going to do in the rest of this video now is we're just going to apply that a couple of times with a few examples of different levels of difficulty. So let's start with this first one. So this one is actually like an ideal completing the square type problem. So in an ideal world, you don't have to divide by anything, right? I already have x squared, so that's cool. So I really just need to start by isolating the variables. So this is going to become x squared plus 4x equals, so I'm going to add 6 to the other side. So this now becomes x squared plus 4x equals 6. Okay, so what I would like to encourage you to do is I would actually like to encourage you to go ahead and complete the square and, just start with that part and then hit play when you think you've got it. We can kind of check in and then I'll send you on another part of the problem to finish. Okay, so if I'm completing the square, my b is 4, my half b is 2, and my half b squared is 4. So now what I need to do with this 4 is I need to add it to both sides of this equation. So this becomes x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 6 plus 4. And so then this will factor x plus 2 squared equals 10. Okay, so if you made it to that part, awesome. And I would love it if you would pause and then just finish. And yeah, let's see what you get. Okay, so next I'm going to have x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 10. So my final answer here will be negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 10. So there you go. Okay, so now when you're using completing the square, you can have an equation given to you in whatever form. So here I've got x squared plus 5 equals 2x. So I'm going to get this in the form so that I can actually complete the square. So I will subtract the 2x over to this side, and I will subtract the 5 to the other side. So this becomes x squared minus 2x equals negative 5. And again, this is like a nice one for completing the square because we already have x squared, like we don't have to divide by anything, right? So for this one, I would love to encourage you to just do this one from start to finish all on your own and then hit play when you think you've got it. So I can go ahead and complete the square. So my b is negative 2, my half b will be negative 1, and then my half b squared will be 1. So I can add the 1 to both sides. So this becomes x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals negative 5 plus 1. So then this becomes x minus 1 squared equals negative 4. And I have x minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 4. So the square root of negative 4 is 2i. So this becomes x minus 1 equals plus or minus 2i. And then I can add 1 to both sides. So I have x equals 1, oops, plus or minus, I forgot the I, plus or minus 2i. Okay, cool. So now let's turn our attention to something a little weirder. Okay, so now I've got 3x squared plus 15x equals negative 6. Okay, so in this case, the very first thing that we need to do before we can complete the square is we have to divide everything by 3. So let's start there. Let's divide everything by 3. And so I get x squared plus 5x equals negative 2. Okay, so admittedly, this is a slightly harder problem to complete the square on, but we have kind of talked about this before. So I want to encourage you just to do this in steps. So first, just try to complete the square on this and get it factored and all that, and hit play when you think you've got it just to check in. So my b will be 5, my half b, so we talked about leaving this in fractional form, so that'll be 5 over 2. And then my half b squared is going to be 25 over 4. So we just square the top and the bottom. So this becomes x squared plus 5x plus 25 over 4 equals negative 2 plus 25 over 4. Okay, so for this one, I am going to want to convert this negative 2 into a fraction. And so just a quick reminder of how to do that. So negative 2 can also be written as negative 2 over 1. And what I need this to have is I need to have a denominator of 4. So now I'm going to take this and I'm just going to multiply the top and bottom by 4 to get the denominator that I want. So this becomes negative 8 over 4. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to have x plus 5 over 2 squared equals, so now I'll rewrite negative 2 as negative 8 over 4 plus 25 over 4. And let me get rid of all this so that I can keep going with the problem. Okay, so now I've got x plus 5 over 2 squared. Let's see. 25 minus 8 is 17, so this is 17 over 4. Okay, so now when I take the square root of both sides, so I just want to be like a little careful with this. So I can take the square root of the top and the bottom, and I bring that up because I can't actually take the square root of 17, but I can take the square root of 4, right? So, oops, I accidentally wrote this as 4, not 2, my bad. Okay, so now I have, let's see, I'm kind of running out of space here. Let me make some room. Okay, so now if I take that square root of 4, this becomes square root of 17 over 2, and then I can finish solving this. So this just becomes x equals negative 5 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 17 over 2. Or you could write all of that over the same denominator, so it could also be negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 17, all of that over 2. Doesn't really matter to me which way you want to do it. Okay, and so the last one. Okay, so for this one, now I have 1/2 x squared plus 3x minus 2. So in this case, what is the first thing that I need to do? It's not so much divide by 1/2, I just need it to be x squared, so I'm going to multiply everything by 2. So to get this party started, and actually in the multiplying everything by 2, it's going to make the problem easier. Okay, so I've multiplied everything by 2 so that this becomes x squared plus 6x minus 4 equals 0. Okay, so that was really the only trick to that one. So again, why don't we just make sure that you feel solid on this so you can finish this one and then hit play when you think you've got it. Okay, so I need to isolate my variables. So I'm going to bring the 4 over to the other side. And then I have my b is 6, my half b is 3, and my half b squared is 9. So I have x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 4 plus 9. And so then this is going to factor x plus 3 squared equals 13. So I'm going to have x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 13. So this is x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 13. Okay, and so that concludes this lesson on completing the square. If you found this video helpful, I would love it if you hit the like button or commented on how it went for you, share it with a friend, or subscribe to the channel. And otherwise, I will talk to you guys in another video. Thanks for watching. Peace.